I think the Boston Bruins were playing the Vancouver Canucks. This is probably in 2013, 2014. And what do you think? And Boston's playing in Vancouver, and Boston wins their team. And one of the guys who's just in Vancouver, who's supporting Boston, he had his jersey on. Bad move, never do that. Don't go to enemy territory and wear your home team's jersey. Anyways, the crowd was very upset. I don't know, this guy started talking. I'm pretty sure they threw this guy off a bridge. Okay. You know, two enemy teams, right? I don't know, I think he survived, yeah.
Good.
Right? But, you know, these tribal rivalries can be based on little to nothing, right? Like, think about it this way. Not a single one of the people involved in that incident played that game that night. They were just watching.
Wow.
And they were upset about what they saw and what they experienced. And one person got the, you know, he got the lucky end of the stick, and then he got the short end of the stick when they threw him over the bridge. Okay. Many of these groups had their own individual, unique beliefs, spiritual beliefs. Right. One of the most fascinating things I learned from teaching Aboriginal studies and learning more about this course is that there are many similarities between the indigenous creation stories and their spiritual stories. There's a lot of similarities between that and the stories in the Bible or the Quran. Okay, so how many of you know about Noah's flood? Okay. I have a nice, beautiful painting, the bottom one, which depicts Noah's flood, right? And so the flood story is a creation story. You know, there's people living there, God wiped them all out and then restarted things, right? And that story takes place in many indigenous stories as well. It's very fascinating. Now, in some of those stories, rather than humans, it's animals partaking in certain activities and playing a role in restoring Earth back to its regular form, right? Where there's more land than there is water. Okay, and many of them lived, I don't know if I'd say in harmony with nature, but they lived nestled within nature, right? They lived very much in their natural environment. Okay, and they were a part of it, and they made sure, as we already mentioned, that they utilized, you know, anytime you kill something, that you use it to the fullest, because you are taking a life. Okay? And you should value and respect the fact that you've taken that life by trying to utilize it as best as you can. Okay. Oh, excellent, we have a map here. This is very blurry, I apologize for that, but instead of showing you on the map at the back of the class, I'll just give you a mini lesson on how indigenous people, how it's believed indigenous people got here. So here is Alberta. Okay, Edmonton's probably somewhere in the middle. Leduc's kind of right there as well. Up here is Alaska. Towards here is Russia. And kind of, if you look at the map at the back of the class, how many of you know where it's believed humans, like the first human species was found? Anyone know?
Like how they got?
No, which area? Which continent, let's say? Africa, right? And so if you look at the map at the back, hopefully everyone can identify Africa. I'm gonna assume it'd be better to just point out Africa's here, right? And so here, kind of in the Horn of Africa, is where they found the first humanoid species. Just like the fossils they found are a couple 100,000 years old, right? It's believed that there was some sort of drought. The human species at that time almost died. They didn't survive, but they slowly started migrating out, right? And they started migrating out to the Arab world, what's now the Arab world, kind of out across the land. Some people went down here, followed the coast sort of into India, into Asia. Some people went north into Europe. Some people eventually, they made it down to the islands. They started inhabiting these islands here, like Malaysia, Indonesia, eventually making it down to Australia. But some people kept going north, and eventually they crossed over. They made it their way to Russia, and they crossed over what is known as the Bering Land Bridge. Okay. And some people believe, it's commonly believed that that happened around 10,000 years ago. But I was listening to this indigenous guy who's on a podcast, and he was explaining the anthropology of language. And what he was saying that what he was saying is that if you look at all the different languages and dialects spoken by indigenous peoples in this area, it doesn't make sense that you would have that much language diversity in 10,000 years. They must have gotten there earlier, right? And so there is kind of new information coming out that suggests that there were people living in North America well before 10,000 years ago, but it's very hard to find that evidence, right? Like wood is a biological substance. It biodegrades very quickly, right? Finding these anthropological dig sites where you can tell like, oh, somebody clearly lived here, or evidence of, hey, this animal, like the way this bone is broken or cut, it was done by someone's hand, like it wasn't just a natural break. Clearly somebody ate this animal. So they're finding new information on that. Yes, okay.
Oh, you said they found like skeletons of ancient humans.
Say that again?
They found skeletons of ancient people.
Not just skeletons, but they find a lot of stone tools, right? So they find arrowheads, right? That's a pretty common indication of there was people here. When they're digging down into the ground, they might see a place where there was a fire, or maybe people use this spot for fire often, and so it leaves a certain layer of biological material in the soil. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so they're digging down into the ground. Okay. So yeah, maybe sometimes they find skeletons. They've also found frozen bodies that were preserved. Right. I forget the name. No. They named the guy something, but they found this frozen person. They believe he was alive a few thousand years ago. He looks a lot like a person. They've also found burial sites of humans. So sometimes a body is buried, and for whatever reason, it's preserved very well, and they're able to examine the body and look at what this person's wearing. I should actually put slides of that in this PowerPoint. I'm going to do that at some point. All right. Okay. Any other questions? Where'd I put my remote? Right there. Okay. So, and then again, just if you look at on your textbook, it won't be blurry, but you can see a variety of different groups that lived in North America, Central America, South America as well, that European people would have been in contact with. Okay, we're gonna watch these two videos tomorrow, but we'll move on to this next part. So, another part of this course looks at and tries to understand the question, why did these European countries, these kingdoms, why did they leave their homes? Why did they seek out new land? Okay, what were they doing? Right, so, you might ask the same, well, I could ask the same question to you. What makes you leave the house on a Saturday? Right, you don't have school on Saturdays. What makes you leave how many of you leave the house on a Saturday? Enough of you. Some of you might be basement dwellers. I don't know, right? Never leave your house. I get like that sometimes when it's minus 40. Okay, for those of you who kind of go out on Friday or Saturday or Sunday, what makes you leave your house? What are you doing? Okay, scout stuff. So you're doing some kind of work or volunteer work on the side. Okay, what'd you say back there? To play basketball, right? Play sports. What else do we leave our houses for? Run errands, right? Like maybe like groceries, right? Do you ever join your parents do groceries?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Back there? What?
It's like when you're in a room for long enough, like run out of oxygen. You go outside.
Fresh air. Get in nature. Get some sunlight. It's good for your soul. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So, you have your individual reasons for leaving the house. A country, a king might have monarchy might have their own reasons for sending people out, right? And it's kind of the three main ones are at the top. Maybe religious reasons, right? They're they're being told by their religious people, like, hey, well, we need to go and spread this faith more and bring more people into it. Okay. Glory, right? To go and fill in, like particularly last 400 years, to fill in more of your map, understand your world, right? So for some of those explorers, some of those people who set out, there might have been glory involved in going over that next mountain, that next hill, to where no one had been before, and figuring out what's on the other side of that, right? An interesting story. So how many of you know where Papua New Guinea is? Papua New Guinea is it's right here. It's just north of Australia. Okay. And then beside it is parts of Indonesia. But from my understanding, there's a large mountain range in between that island country. And so when there were some people, like European explorers, they were living in Australia, they went to these islands, these island countries. There's two stories. I'll tell the second one first, okay? What they learned from these people was that some of them had never traveled over the mountains to the other side. So these two groups of people didn't know that the other group lived there, right? And so, you know, that part of the glory is that spirit of adventure. How many of you ever gone on a hike? You know, maybe you really enjoy just walking through the mountain. That's funny, okay? Some people really love just climbing to the top of a mountain, seeing the view from up there, right? It's just different activities, right? The first story of that trip from Australia, I'll tell you, is kind of funny.